I'd like to introduce New York Law School's Dean Anthony Crowell for welcoming remarks.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Good. I'm glad to see the room is filling up. It's a beautiful day in Tribeca and a great day to have a very meaningful conversation on redistricting. As Jeff said, I'm Anthony Crowell, the Dean and President here at New York Law School, and I want to thank you for joining our Election, Census, and Redistricting Institute for this program on New York redistricting, what happened and what's next. I first want to thank and recognize Jeff Wice, who is the director of the Institute, a professor and senior fellow here, and who I consider the Dean of Redistricting and Census Law for our city and state. Our law school is immensely proud to be the home of Jeff and the Institute because the issues they examine are foundational to shaping the future of our city, state, and country. During the census count in 2020, Jeff was an essential partner to local governments around the state, community group, and regular New Yorkers in further understanding the importance of the census to the future of our state. And in the last redistricting process in 2022, Jeff's expertise was essential in helping to educate local governments, civic organizations, and the wider public about the process and potential outcomes. Our students have been an essential part of his work, and I am appreciative that he's given them that opportunity. And it's vital that law students continue to understand the very complicated and important sets of laws, policies, and issues surrounding the census, redistricting, and elections so that they can lead the work the next time around. Jeff's Institute exemplifies perfectly why we consider ourselves New York's law school and take pride in being a thoughtful partner to a wide range of government and civic policies and programs. And what happens at the state and local level has never been more important or consequential. That's why I'm very grateful to Jeff for organizing today's conference, as our state's redistricting process not only affects communities here, but control of Congress as well. In other words, it will help determine the future of our country. I'm glad to see so many important leaders speaking on the panels today, including Jonathan Cervas, who was tasked with drawing New York's congressional and state Senate district lines in 2022. He and all the speakers today will provide unique and vital insights so that we have a clear understanding of what happened and what to expect in the next redistricting cycle. So thanks again to you, Jeff, for all your work, and I hope you all enjoy and benefit from today's program and take the lessons learned out with you to do good things. Jeff?
Well, thank you, Dean Crowell. I just want to take a few minutes. Again, I'm Jeff Wice. I'm a professor and director of the law school's Elections, Census, and Redistricting Institute, a veteran now of 5 past redistricting cycles at the state, national, local level, and now doing work here to provide resources for the public, the media, institutions on how this cog of democracy works. So thank you all for being here on a yet to be hot day, so to speak. We're at least have the air conditioning here while you're inside. We're going to spend the next 3 hours in here, hopefully to wrap up around 12:30. The presentations will be an opening keynote speech by Dr. Jonathan Cervas, who was the special master for the state court in 2022, who drew the state Senate plan still being used and the congressional map that was in place for 2022. Following Dr. Cervas's presentation, you'll hear from Steve Romalewski from the City University of New York Graduate Center Mapping Service, who will show you how over time the district map lines have changed, give you a visual presentation on that. And then we're going to have 2 separate panels. The first panel is going to focus on the 2014 constitutional amendment, what was behind it, the pros and cons, the litigation that ensued afterwards, and how the process played out. The second panel will cover, take a look at where do we go from here? What happens next? Do we keep the state constitutional amendment in place from 2014, or is there time and need to make changes before 2030? Now it's 2024. We're nearly halfway through the decade. And why are we here for a process that for many, many years only took 2 years, the census year, the line drawing year, and then by the second year, hold your elections and wait till the next 8 years goes by. But here we are halfway into the decade with a process from 2020 that ended 2 years too late. And now that we're 6 years before 2030, we'll need at least 3 or 4 years to amend the Constitution. So this is no longer the, like, what are you doing here again? Is it that time of decade, but something that really is ongoing. So this is a timely year to hold this conference to kick things off, because you'll see a lot of discussion about reforming the Constitution in the coming months. A few housekeeping things to cover. For those of you who are attorneys seeking CLE credit, please make sure that you have signed in at the registration desks with I think it's your name and the time you arrived. And you also have to sign out before you leave. And that once you complete that process, signing in, signing out, you will receive credit through an email certificate that we'll send to you. The materials for this conference should have been sent to everybody. There's a link on the piece of paper on each table. If you don't have it or want to bring anything up, we have copies of the relevant court cases, the Constitution, some analytical pieces that I've done, and the big bonus is a copy of the 2020 National Conference of State Legislatures Red Book, a legislator and staffer's guide to the redistricting process. And just want to recognize that Ben Williams from the NCSL in Denver joined us today. Might have come in the farthest from Denver, Colorado, farthest that I'm aware of. Also, for those of you who do not receive the weekly updates that we send out, please let me know, give me your card, or just Google NYLS and redistricting. Our website will come up. You'll find my contact information. And every Monday we send out news on what's going on in New York. Let's see, restrooms are, as you go back towards the elevators, you'll see signage to them. I also want to recognize the help and assistance of the Law School Center for New York City Law, headed up by Professor Ross Sandler, who couldn't be with us this morning. Ross and his staff, who I work very closely with, have been instrumental in organizing this conference. And just to recognize and thank Ben Max, Veronica Rose, Rosa White, Chelsea Ramjiwan for their help in setting this up today and helping with the tables, and the students who work with me at the institute that I run, Alexis Marking, Hussein Ahmed, Jennifer Hutz, and Bo Vandermeulen. And a special thanks and recognition to Piper Benedict, who just graduated New York Law School and was instrumental in helping me over the last 2 years. I don't think she's in the room now. Oh, thank you. I thought you're outside. Thank you so much. Okay, and let's see, a video of this will also be available if you want to view it later. We'll be sending out a link so you can see it or share it with other people who couldn't be here today. So I'd like to call up to the microphone, to the podium, Dr. Jonathan Cervas, who will give us his presentation on being once the most powerful man in New York State.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and guests. Good morning. It's an honor to stand before you today at this important conference on the topic of New York redistricting and, more importantly, redistricting reform. Professor Wice has asked me to talk about my experiences regarding New York redistricting. My involvement in New York redistricting came quite late in the process. While events leading up to the Harkenrider case were unfolding, I was frequently traveling the Pennsylvania Turnpike between Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, helping to negotiate my home state's legislative districts. That too was a contentious process that resulted in a lawsuit that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, though certiorari was not granted. The reapportionment process in Pennsylvania involved politicians, which is a significant departure from my usual work with courts. Pennsylvania now stands as the only state in the country that has split partisan control between the upper and lower chambers. Is that right, Ben? Yes, use NCSL's website to get that data. Moreover, the partisan compositions of the legislature will ensure that they'll be competitive throughout the entire decade, reflective of what people think that the process ought to produce. I'll save detailed stories of Pennsylvania's reapportionment for another day and another conference. However, one crucial lesson that I learned from that experience that is worth sharing is that no one person can know everything or handle complex problems alone. It takes a dedicated team of individuals to be truly effective, and I'll return to that thought in a moment. Relevant to this conference, I had the honor of serving as special master in 2022. That work proved to be difficult, contentious, and controversial. But it was also important work. And the maps for which we produced for the court, I remain very proud of. The post-2020 census cycle of redistricting has been called the Great Gerrymander of 2012. And the national congressional map resulted in minority rule. As the 2020 cycle concluded, many national Democrats believed that partisan gerrymandering around the country had again caused a pro-Republican advantage, and that the congressional district plan in New York could potentially partially or fully offset those effects. Some of this worry was clearly warranted since several states utilized maps that were ruled illegal, yet were still used in the 2022 midterm election anyway. After the Steuben County Supreme Court struck down the New York plan, the pro-Republican bias nationally would be locked in. After all, these actions in New York were happening in the spring of 2022, just a few months before the midterm. Other blue states like California, Colorado, and Washington, which themselves had truly independent redistricting commissions, had failed to create their own gerrymanders. New York was seen as being critically important for offsetting gerrymandering in Florida and Texas. The timing and the potential impact of New York redistricting led to intense media focus on the actions of the court and myself. I'll leave aside the merits of the unilateral disarmament argument to partisans. Chief Justice Roberts said that partisan gerrymandering is, quote, a political question that, quote, must find their resolution outside the federal judiciary. This has clearly complicated the desire for a coherent national policy regulating extreme partisan gerrymandering, inequality, and representation. As for the political question, take New York, for example. Democrats regularly win 60 to 70% of the vote in New York. With 26 districts, how many should Democrats win? How easy should those victories be? And how much say should Republicans and independents have over how those districts are drawn? As Roberts and others on the Supreme Court continue to reiterate, it is difficult to establish a standard that is equally applicable in every jurisdiction. But state courts have been able to establish these standards, and the Harkenrider case is a case in point. Still, different standards govern different jurisdictions, and many states refuse to enforce the rules that voters have established. Other states refuse to set any standards at all and often ignore federal laws like the Voting Rights Act. Often, the partisan balance of state courts is determinative of how they are willing or whether they are willing to strike down plans as partisan gerrymanders. The map I prepared for the court received mixed reviews. Here are some notable quotes. Adam Kincaid, president and executive director of the National Republican Redistricting Fund, said, quote, even the map produced by Common Cause had a smaller pro-democratic partisan bias. This map is a step in the right direction, but still unduly favors Democrats. Dave Wasserman, who has the Twitter handle @Redistrict, asked, were there worse outcomes for Dems in the special master map? Absolutely. Representative Akeem Jeffries said, the draft map is unacceptable, unconscionable, and unconstitutional. Though the media focused on the most sensational of these comments, plenty of individuals and groups have offered praise of these maps. From my perspective, every map has shortcomings. The redistricting process itself can be challenging. This includes court remedial proceedings. If I may, I just want to take a moment to say that I had a great team that helped assist my work in New York. As I've already mentioned, among the valuable things I learned in PA reapportionment was the importance of a quality team. The individuals on my team in New York had various complementary backgrounds. These include perhaps the leading scholar on the Voting Rights Act and my mentor, an alumni from this law school who tracked the entirety of New York redistricting, covered every community hearing held by the Redistricting Commission, and had detailed notes from each of those. Also a person who knows more about redistricting than practically anyone on the planet, who has deep ties to the New York City suburbs, and has an indispensable understanding of redistricting nationally. And finally, a mapper with whom I've worked with on various occasions, who is partially responsible for congressional districts all around the country. He's among the smartest undergraduate students I've ever worked with. He was a finalist for the Rhodes Scholars program this year and will be attending Berkeley Law School this fall. Needless to say, I'm very proud of the team that we assembled to do this work. The amount of negativity and pessimism about the remedial process is beyond tally. From my perspective, our work was transparent and collaborative. Not only did we have a hearing where people were invited to provide testimony and suggestions, I received thousands of correspondence from the public, members of Congress, and from good government and activist groups. These comments were read, and those that made the most sense were implemented in the final map. Michael Lee from the Brennan Center said after the map was finalized that, quote, "The final map actually shows a lot of responsiveness to the community input, which is how an iterative, good faith process is supposed to work." Most typically, redistricting is done behind the scenes and the public's participation is either limited or ignored. Those of us in this room understand the importance of redistricting and the impact on both people's lives and on partisan outcomes. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said of those who are not in this room. The public is woefully undereducated on these topics. Only a small fraction of the public from New York submitted comments at all. Remember, there are 20 million people in New York and only 3,000 comments came in. Many of these comments are what some people have called astroturf comments, meaning that they are artificial grassroots, usually organized by interests that are directly affected by the lines. To be clear, I mean politicians who wish to run for office. However, there are several organizations such as the League of Women Voters, APA Voice, and Common Cause that have been actively involved with redistricting efforts in both Pennsylvania and New York, as well as nationally. These organizations advocate for voters in a positive and effective manner, increasing public awareness about redistricting. Additionally, resources like Dave's Redistricting app, a free web mapping program, the Redistricting Network Twitter account, which offers a centralized source of breaking redistricting news and curated important developments, Redistricting in You from CUNY, that allows users to easily view and compare maps, along with Professor Wice's newsletter from the New York Law School, have all contributed to redistricting education. But despite their important work, these efforts remain underfunded. This contrasts with the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent on partisan elections. Redistricting advocacy and redistricting education is severely lacking. I will now return to the maps. The maps that we produced for the court resulted in immediate and sharp criticisms, at least the congressional map. The state Senate map, which I also helped to produce, seemed to have escaped controversy, perhaps because there are no partisan consequences at stake. There's the mic. Most of the criticisms directed at the congressional map, in my opinion, were unjustified. For example, it was said that the map was enough to, quote, make Jim Crow blush, with an obvious allusion to the discriminatory actions to disenfranchise blacks in the early 1900s. But these comments are not backed up by facts. The map fully complied with the Voting Rights Act. These districts emerged naturally from the political geography and demography of New York. If anything, the map we produced for the court had one additional majority-minority district compared to the map that was struck down by the court. That was the one we're in currently. The media obsessed over the pairing of incumbents in Manhattan, complete obsession. These pairings were completely unintentional. A prominent member of Congress said that the drawing of districts with 2 incumbents was, quote, unconstitutional and unacceptable. A largely forgotten and ignored fact was that New York, because of the lack of population growth, had lost a congressional district in apportionment, and all members were inevitably going to lose territory from their former districts. The new districts would, at best, only partially resemble the previous decade's districts. All line drawing ought to be focused on voters, not politicians. This is the reason why voters, when given the option, always choose to take power of line drawing away from politicians. Plenty of research suggests that processes that exclude politicians are superior on practically every dimension, including less partisanship, a greater emphasis on minority rights, and greater satisfaction among voters. This includes maps drawn by independent commissions and by courts. Many criticisms of the court map revolved around the treatment of communities of interest. Determining which communities ought to be grouped together is the core challenge of redistricting. Inevitably, some communities will be split across multiple districts out of necessity, and others will find themselves in districts with communities they share little in common with. Redistricting is more of an art than it is science. In fact, the number of possible district configurations in a typical redistricting plan exceed the number of atoms in the universe. Let me go and comment briefly on the division of Manhattan, which proved to be a media darling story. Though it may be true that the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side have differences, I remain unconvinced that those differences were drastic enough to warrant combining more desperate communities like the Upper East Side in Chinatown. In pop culture and in demography, downtown, midtown, and uptown are more important than East Side, West Side, leaving aside the West Side story. As someone who works with young adults, I would be remiss if I did not take a few moments to address how protecting incumbents can lead to disinterest among young people. Young people are increasingly disappointed and discouraged with democracy. And one reason is the advanced age of members of Congress. We currently have the 3rd oldest Congress ever, and all recent Congresses have been among the oldest. The median age of individuals in the US is 39 years old, which happens to be my age, while the average age of a member of the House is 58. When politicians choose their own district lines, districts become less representative and ultimately puts democracy itself at risk. The implications of how communities are treated should not be understated. Communities can find themselves divided and marginalized, and their voices diluted in the political arena. The impact of redistricting on communities is profound. It affects how well communities are represented and how effectively their needs are addressed. Ensuring the process is fair and just is a daunting but necessary task. But identifying communities of interest and determining how they should be situated continues to be a challenge. Many talented community groups are working on this, and academics have attempted to create more objective models of communities of interest, but progress is difficult, prone to manipulation, and expensive. In recent years, technologies have revolutionized the way we do redistricting. Advanced mapping software and sophisticated data analysis tools have made it possible to identify communities of interest and make them mappable. These technological advances have also increased transparency, allowing the public to engage more directly with the process. My hope is that this technology will continue to bear fruit and play a more prominent role in the 2030 cycle. Several things come to my mind in regards to communities. One, they should be mappable, such that they are useful for map makers in defining district lines. Two, they should be recognizable, such that members of the community can verify their existence. Three, they should be defined ahead of time to avoid any manipulation. And four, they cannot be created solely to advance political objectives. The court map that I helped produce, though not perfect, was very good. Here's why. It is important for any democratic electoral system that the party that wins the most votes is likely to win the most seats. That is, district lines are responsive to voters. Using social science measures of partisan bias, the court map treated both parties equivalently. Independent observers recognized this in the court map. The lines also created dozens of competitive opportunities for both parties and brought a large stream of campaign funds from across the country into the state of New York. Both the Redistricting Commission and the legislature seemed to agree in the end that the court map was basically good. 94% of all voters were completely unaffected when changes were made by both bodies. They affirmed what I already knew. No map is perfect, but the court map was justifiable and non-dilutive. Many of the changes that were made do raise some questions. For instance, what constitutional criteria was served by relocating Co-op City into District 16? Why were several marginal changes made to Districts 7, 8, 9, and 10? Why were those changes not proposed to me in the court back in 2022? On the other hand, District 12 was among the most challenged districts in the court map for supposedly dividing communities of interest and its treatment of Jewish voters. However, not one change was made to District 12 in the 2024 map. Whereas the court map divided 16 counties, the 2024 map divides 21 counties. The 2024 map is less compact than the court map, and some of the changes seem to only be a result of improving incumbent chances of re-election. One criticism the court received was a lack of public hearing. The map now in place was not a product of vigorous public debate. I am unaware of any hearings that the legislature held. In fact, several media outlets reported that they were surprised by the legislature's map. No report was issued to justify any of the changes that were made, particularly those that seemed to contradict the legal constraints in law. This lack of transparency underscores the need for laws that mandate an open and transparent process shielded from manipulation. Ultimately, redistricting will always involve choices and judgments about how to distribute political power among communities, parties, and various interests. We must leave this conference committed to reforming this process and the rules both here in New York and elsewhere. Several potential reforms stand out. Whenever the public is asked to vote on eliminating partisan gerrymandering, there is always an overwhelming bipartisan desire to remove politics from redistricting. Further legal reforms are necessary to address lingering issues of fairness and prevent partisan gerrymandering. However, laws are only useful when they are respected. They should be written clearly and allow for judicial intervention when circumvented. So, I am a strong proponent of direct language in state constitutions that constrain map makers. Criteria should be clear and non-manipulable and should have a clearly defined ordering of importance. The New York Municipal Home Rule Law offers a compelling example of how such a law can be structured. Equality of population and protection of minority voting rights are the highest priorities. It is my view that preserving political subdivisions is critical for constraining the most egregious gerrymanders. It should be the next highest ranked criteria, given the objectivity of the criteria. Political subdivisions, like cities and counties, represent an example of a community of interest that is based on objective, mappable, and cognizable data. That political boundaries is fixed is both a virtue and a detriment, to be sure. Relying on these objective boundaries limits the most extreme partisan tendencies, and any reform should include protections of political subdivisions. Deviations from the preservation of political subdivisions should be justified and based on broad agreement that communities are better served by these divisions. Importantly, smaller communities should receive more protection than larger subdivisions. This is both practical and justifiable. I also believe that it is critical that plaintiffs have the ability to get litigation costs reimbursed when they win lawsuits. In some states, those who have their rights trampled are required to self-fund litigation to protect those rights. That makes it far too easy for legislatures to suppress voters' rights. There is a growing movement towards greater public participation in redistricting. Engaging citizens through public hearings, interactive mapping tools, and open data initiatives can ensure the process is more democratic and reflective of community needs. But these things need resources. Crucially, the legal framework is central to developing a plan through an inclusive and transparent process. Establishing a better process before the 2030 census can help prevent costly litigation, encourage more public input, and lead to more representative maps. Thank you for your attention and participation in this vitally important discussion. Together, we can shape the future where every voice is heard and every community is represented. Enjoy the rest of this conference.